Chapter 3 Jonathon Harker's Journal continued. When I found that I was prisoner of a sort of wide feeling came over me. I rushed up and down the stairs, trying every door and peering out every window I could find. But after a little the conviction of my helplessness overpowered all other things. When I look back after a few hours, I think I must have been mad for the time, for I behaved as much as a rat does in a trap. When, however, the conviction had come to me that I was helpless, I sat down quietly, as quietly as I ever done anything in my life, and began to think over what was the best to be done. I'm thinking still, and as yet have come up to no definite conclusion. Of course, only I am certain that there is no making my ideas known to the Count. He knows well that I am imprisoned, and he has done it himself, and has doubtless his own motives for it. He would only deceive me if I trusted him fully with the facts. So far as I can see, the only plan will be to keep my knowledge and fears to myself, and my eyes open. I am, I know, either being deceived, like a baby, by my own fears, or else I am in dire straits, and if the latter be so, I need, and shall need, all my brains to get through. I had hardly come to this conclusion when I heard the great door below shut, and knew that the Count had returned. He had not come at once by the library, so I cautiously into my own room and found him making the bed. This was odd, but only confirmed what I had thought all along, that there were no servants in the house. When later I saw him through the chink of the hinges of the door laying by the table in the dining room, I was assured of it, for if he does himself all these menial offices, surely it is proof that there is no one else to do them. This gave me a fright, for if there is no one else in the castle, it must have been the Count himself who was the driver of the coach that brought me here. This is a terrible thought, for if so, what does it mean that he could control the wolves, as he did, by only holding up his hands in silence? How was it that all the people in Bistris and on the coach had some terrible fear for me? What meant the giving of the crucifix, of the garlic, of the wild rose, and the mountain ash? Bless that good, good woman who hung the crucifix around my neck, for it is a comfort and a strength to me whenever I touch it. It is odd that a thing which I would have taught to regard with disfavor as idolatrous should come in time of loneliness and trouble me of help. Is it that there is something in the essence of the thing itself, or that of the medium? Tangible help in conveying memories of sympathy and comfort. Some time, if it may be, I must examine the matter and try to make up my mind about it. In the meantime, I must find out all that I can about Count Dracula, as it may help me to understand. Tonight he may talk of himself, if I turn the conversation that way. I must be careful, however, not to awake his suspicion. Midnight. I have had a long talk with the Count. I asked him a few questions on Transylvanian history, and he warmed up on the subject wonderfully. And in speaking of things and people, and especially of battles, he spoke as if he had been present at them all. This he regards explained by saying that to a boyar the pride of his house and the name of his own pride, that their glory is his glory, and that their fate is his fate. Whenever he spoke of his house, he always said we, and spoke almost in the plural, like a king speaking. I wish I could put down all that he said exactly as he said it, for to me it was most fascinating. It seems to have in the whole history of the country. He grew excited as he spoke, and walked about the room, pulling his great white mustache, grasping anything on which he had laid his hands as though he would crush it with his main strength. One thing he said, which I shall put down as nearly as I can, for it tells in its way the story of his race. We Slatskillies have a right to be proud, for in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as land fights for lordship. Here, in the whirlpool of European races, the Ulgric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them, which their berserkers displayed to such fell intent on the seaboards of Europe, aye, and of Asia and Africa too, till the peoples thought that the werewolves themselves had come. Here too, when they did come, they found the Huns, whose warlike fury had swept the earth like a leaving flame, till the dying peoples held in their veins ran the blood of those old witches who expelled the Cynthia, and mated with the devils of the desert. Fools, fools! What devil or what witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in their veins? He held up his arms. It is a wonder that we were a conquering race, that we were proud, so that when the Magyar and the Lombard, the Avar and the Bulgar, and the Turk poured his thousands on our frontiers, we drove them back. Is it strange that when Alipad and his legion swept through the Hungarian fatherland, he found us here when he reached the frontier? And that his Honofagdalis was completed here? When the Hungarian flood swept eastward, the Zlekis were claimed as kindred by the victorious Magyars, and to us for centuries was trusted the guarding of the frontier of Turkeyland. Aye, and more than that, endless duty of the frontier guard, for, as the Turks say, water sleeps, the enemy is sleepless. Who more gladly than we throughout the four nations received the bloody sword, or at its warlike forked quiver, to the standard of the king? When was redeemed that great shame for my nation, the shame of Kosova, when the flags of the Walash and the Magyar went down beneath the crescent? Who was it but one of my own race, as Vivode crossed the Danube and beat the Turk on his own ground? This was a Dracula indeed. Who was it that his own unworthy brother, when he had fallen, sold his people to the Turk, and brought the shame of slavery on them? Was it not this Dracula, indeed, who inspired the others of his race, who in a later age again and again brought his forces over a great river to Turkeyland, who, when he was beaten back, came again and again and again, though he had to come alone from the bloody field where his troops were being slaughtered, since he knew that he alone could ultimately triumph? They said that he thought only of himself. Bah! What good are peasants without a leader? Where ends the war without a brain and heart to conduct it? Again, when the battle of the Mochachs, we threw off the Hungarian yoke. We of the Dracula blood were amongst the leaders, and our spirits would not brook that we were not free. Ah, young sir, the Sleckies and the Dracula at their heart's blood, their brains and their swords, can boast a record of mushroom growths like the Hafbergs and the Romanovs can never reach. The warlike days are over. Blood is too precious a thing these days of dishonorable peace, and the glories of the great races are as a tale as that is told. It was by this time close on morning, and we went to bed. You know, this diary seems horribly like the beginning of the Arabian Nights, for everything has to break off at cockcrow, or like the ghost of Hamlet's father. 12th of May. Let me begin with facts. Bare, meager facts, verified by books and figures, and of which there can be no doubt. I must not confuse them with experience which will have to rest on my own observation, or my memory of them. Last evening, when the Count came from his room, he began asking me questions on legal matters, and on doing certain kinds of business. I had spent the day wearily over books, and simply to keep my mind occupied, went over some matters I had examined at the Lincoln's Inn. There was a certain method in the Count's inquiries, so I shall try to put them in sequence. The knowledge may somehow or some time be useful to me. First, he asked me if a man in England might have 2 solicitors, or more. I told him he might have a dozen if he wished, but that it would not be wise to have more than 1 solicitor engaged in one transaction, as only one could act at a time, and that the change would certainly be militant against his interests. He seemed thoroughly to understand, and went on to ask if there were any practical difficulty in having one man to attend, say, to banking, and to another look after shipping, in case local help were needed in the place far from home of the banking solicitor. I asked him to explain more fully, so that I might not, by perchance, mislead him. So he said, "I shall illustrate. Your friend and mine, Mr. Peter Hawkins, from under the shadow of your beautiful cathedral in Exeter, which is far from London, buys for me through your good self my place in London. Good. Now here let me say frankly, lest you should think it strange that I have sought the services of one so far from London, instead of someone resident here, that my motive was no local interest might be served save my wish only, and as one of London resident might, perhaps, have some purpose of himself to friend or to serve. I went thus afield to seek my agent, whose labours should only be of my interest. Now, suppose I, who have much affairs, wish to ship goods, say to Newcastle, or Durham, or Harwich, or Dover. Might it not be that it could be much more eased by consigning one to these ports? I answered that certainly it would be most easy, but that solicitors had a system of agency one way or another, so that local work could be done locally on instruction by any solicitor, so that the client, simply placing himself in the hands of one man, could have his wishes carried out by him without further trouble. "But," said he, "I could be at liberty to direct myself, is it not so?" "Of course," I replied, "and such is often done by men of business, who do not like the whole of their affairs to be known by any one person." "Good," said he, and then he went on to ask about the means of making consignments, with the forms to be gone through, and of all sorts of difficulties which might arise. But my forethought could be guarded against. I explained all these things to him to the best of my ability, and he certainly left me under the impression that he would have made a wonderful solicitor, for there was nothing that he did not think of or foresee. For a man who was never in the country, and who did not evidently do much in the way of business, his knowledge and acumen were wonderful. When he had satisfied himself on these points of which he had spoken, and I had verified all as well as I could by the books available, he suddenly stood up and said, "Have you written since your first letter to your friend, Mr. Peter Hawkins, or to any other?" It was with some bitterness in my heart that I answered that I had not, that as yet I had not seen any opportunity of sending letters to anyone. "Then you should write now, my young friend," he said, laying a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Write to your friend, and to any other, and say, if it will please you, that you shall stay with me another month from now." "Do you wish me to stay so long?" I asked, for my heart grew cold at the thought. "I desire it much. Nay, I will take no refusal. When your master or employer, what you will, engaged that someone should come on his behalf, it was understood that my needs only were to be consulted. I have not stinted, is that so?" What could I do but bow acceptance? It was Mr. Hawkins' interests, not mine, and I had to think of him, not myself. And besides, while Count Dracula was speaking, there was in his eyes and in his bearing which made me remember that I was a prisoner, and if I wished it I could have no choice. The Count saw his victory in my bow, and his mastery of the troubles in my face, for he began at once to use them. but in his own smooth, resistless way. I pray you, my good young friend, that you will not discourse things other than business in your letters. It will doubtless please your friends to know that you are well, and that you look forward to getting home to them. Is that not so? As he spoke, he handed me 3 sheets of notepaper and 3 envelopes. They were all of the thinnest foreign print post, and looking at them, then to him, noticing the quiet smile and the sharp, canine teeth lying over his red upper lip. I understood, as well as if he had spoken, that I should be careful what I write, for he would be able to read it. So I determined to write only formal notes for now, but to write fully to Mr. Hawkins in secret, and also to Mina, for to her I could write in shorthand, which would puzzle the Count, if he did see it. When I had written my 2 letters, I sat in quiet, reading a book, whilst the Count wrote several notes referring, as he wrote them, to some books on his table. When I took up my 2 and placed them with his own, and put by his writing materials, after which, the instant the door had closed behind him, I leaned over and looked at the letters, which were face down on the table. I felt no compunction in doing so, for under the circumstances I felt that I should protect myself in every way possible. One of the letters was addressed to Samuel F. Billington, number 7, The Crescents, Whitby. Another to Eyre Lautner, Varna, and the third to Couch-and-Kill, London. And the fourth was to O'Haran Klopstock, and Buller-Thunkers, Budapest. The second and fourth were unsealed, and I was about to look at them when I saw the door handle move. I sank back in my seat, having just time to replace the letters as they had been, and resume my book before the Count, holding still another letter in his hand, entered the room. He took up the letters on the table and stamped them carefully, and then, turning to me, said, I trust you will forgive me, but I have much work to do in private this evening. You will, I hope, find all things as you wish. And the door turned, and a moment after his pause, Let me advise you, my dearly young friend, nay, let me warn you with all seriousness, that should you leave these rooms, you will not by any chance go to sleep in any other part of the castle. It is old, and has many memories, and there are bad dreams for those who sleep unwisely. Be warned. Should sleep now or ever overcome you, or be like to do so, then haste to your own chamber or to these rooms, for your rest will be then safe. If you be not careful in this respect, then he finished his speech in a gruesome way, for he mentioned with his hands, as if he were washing them. I quite understood. My only doubt was to whether any dream could be more terrible than the unnatural, horrible net of gloom and misery which seemed closing around me. Later, I endorsed the last words written, but this time there is no doubt in question. I shall not fear to sleep in any place where he does not. I have placed a crucifix over the head of my bed. I imagine that my rest is thus freer from dreams, and there it shall remain. When he left me, and I went to my room. After a little while, not hearing any sound, I came out, and I went up some stone stairs to take a look towards the south. There was some sense of freedom in that vast expanse, inaccessible though it was to me, as compared to the narrower, ill-spent, accessible courtyards of the dark. Looking out on this, I felt that I was indeed in a prison, and I seemed to want a breath of fresh air, though it were of the night. I am beginning to feel this nocturnal existence telling me. It is destroying my nerve. I start at my own shadow, and am full of all sorts of horrible imaginings. God knows that there is ground for any terrible fear in this accursed place. I looked out over the beautiful expanse, bathed in the soft yellow moonlight, till it was almost as light as day. The soft light as the distant hills became melted, and the shadows in the valleys and the gorges of velvety blackness. The mere beauty seemed to cheer me. There was a peace and comfort in every breath I drew. As I leaned from the window, my eye was caught by something moving a story below me, and somewhat to my left. Or I imagined, from the lie of the rooms and the windows of the Count's room would not look out. The window at which I stood was tall and deep, stone-mullioned, and, though weather-worn, was still complete. But it was evidently many a day since the case had been there. I drew back behind the stonework and looked carefully out. What I saw was the Count's head coming out from the window. I did not see the face, but I knew the man by the neck and the movement of his back and arms. In any case, I could not mistake the hands which had so many opportunities in studying. I was at first interested and somewhat amused, for it is wonderful how small a matter of interest can amuse a man when he is a prisoner. But my very feelings changed to repulsion and terror when I saw the whole man emerge from the window and begin to crawl down the side of the castle in the dreadful abyss, face down, with his cloak spreading out over him with great wings. At first, I could not believe my eyes. I thought it was some trick of the moonlight or some weird effect of shadow, but I kept looking, and it could be no delusion. I saw the fingers and toes grasp the corners of the stones, worn clear from the mortar from the stress of years, and by thus using every projection and inequality moved downwards with considerable speed, just as a lizard moves along a wall. What manner of man is this? Or what manner of creature is it that the semblance of man? I feel the dread of this horrible place overpowering me. I am in fear, an awful fear, and there is no escape for me. I am encompassed with terrors that I dare not think of. 15th of May. Once more I have seen the Count go out in his lizard fashion. He moved downward in a sidelong way, some 100 feet down, and a good deal to the left. He vanished into some hole or window. When his head had disappeared, I leaned out to try and see more, with no avail. The distance was too great to allow a proper angle of sight. I knew he had left the castle now. No use of opportunity to explore more than I had dared to as of yet. I went back to the room, and taking the lamp, tried all the doors. They were all locked as I had expected, and the locks were comparatively new. But I went down the stone stairs to the hall where I had entered originally. I found I could pull back the bolts easily enough and unhook the great chains, but the door was locked, and the key was gone. That key must be in the Count's room. I must watch his door be unlocked, so that I may get in and escape. I went to make a thorough examination of the various stairs and passages, to try doors that opened from them. One or two small rooms near the hall were open, but there was nothing to be seen in them except old furniture, dusty with age and moth-eaten. At last, however, I found one door at the top of the stairway, which, though it seemed to be locked, gave under a little pressure. I tried harder, and found that it was not really locked, but the resistance came from the fact that the hinges had somewhat fallen, and the heavy door rested on the floor. There was an opportunity which I must not have again, so I exerted myself, and with many efforts forced it back so that I could enter. I was now in the wing of a castle further to the right than the rooms I knew, and a lower story down. From the windows I could see the entire suite of rooms that lay along the south of the castle, the windows of the end room looking both west and south. On the latter side, as well as to the corner of the great rock, so that all three sides was quite impregnable, and great windows were placed here in the sling, or bow, and culverin could not reach, and consequently light and comfort impossible to position, which had been guarded or secured. To the west was a great valley, and then, rising far away, great jagged mountain fastnesses, rising peak on peak, the sheer rock studded with mountain ash and thorn, whose roots clung to the cracks and crevices and crannies of the stone. This was evidently the portion of the castle occupied by bygone days, for the furniture had more air of comfort than any I had seen. The windows were curtainless, and the yellow moonlight, flooding through the diamond panes, enabled one to see even colors, whilst it softened the wealth of dust which lay over all, and disguised in some measure the ravages of time or the moth. My lamp seemed to be of little effect in the brilliant moonlight, but I was glad to have it with me, for there was a dread loneliness in the place which chilled my heart and made my nerves tremble. Still, it was better than living alone in the rooms which I had come to hate from the presence of the Count, and after trying a little to soothe my nerves, I found a soft quietude come over me. Here I am, sitting at a little oak table, where the old times possibly of some fair lady sat to pen, which much thought and many blushes, her ill-spent love letter, and writing in my diary in shorthand all that was happened since I closed it last. It is the 19th century, up to date with a vengeance. And yet, unless my senses deceive me, the old centuries had, and have, powers of their own which mere modernity cannot kill. Later, the morning of 16th of May. God preserve my sanity, for to do this I am reduced. Safety and the assurance of safety are things of the past. Whilst I live on here, there is but one thing for hope for, that I may not go mad, if indeed I be not mad already. If I be sane, then surely it is maddening to think that of all the foul things that lurk in this hateful place the Count is the least dreadful to me. That to him alone I can look for safety, even though this be only whilst I can serve his purpose. Great God, merciful God, let me be calm, for out of that way lies madness indeed. I begin to get new lights on certain things which have puzzled me. Up to now, I never quite knew what Shakespeare meant when he made Hamlet say, "My tablets, quick, my tablets! 'Tis meet that I put it down," etc. For now, feeling that as though my own brain were unhinged, as if the shock had come which must end in my undoing, I turned to my diary for repose. The habit of entering accurately must help me soothe. The Count's mysterious warnings frightened me at the time. It frightens me more now that I think of it, for the furniture he has is a fearful hold upon me. I shall fear it doubts what he may say. When I had written in my diary, and fortunately replaced the book and pen in my pockets, I felt sleepy. The Count's warnings came into my mind, but I took pleasure in disobeying it. The sense of sleep was upon me, and with some obstinacy which sleep brings an outrider. The soft moonlight soothed, and the wide expanse without gave a sense of freedom which refreshed me. I determined not to return tonight to the gloom-haunted rooms, but sleep here, where the old ladies had sat and swung, and lived sweet lives whilst their gentle breasts were so sad that their menfolk away in the midst of remorseless wars. I drew a great couch from its place in the corner, so that, as I lay, I could look at the lovely view to the east and the south, and unthinking of and uncaring for the dust, I composed myself for sleep. I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I hope so, but I fear, for all that followed was startlingly real, so real that now, sitting here in the broad, full sunlight of the morning, I cannot in the least believe that it was all asleep. I was not alone. The room was the same, unchanged in a way that since I came into it. I could see along the floor, in the bright, brilliant moonlight, my own footsteps marked where I disturbed the long accumulation of dust. In the moonlight opposite me there were three young women, ladies by their dress and manner. I thought at the time I must be dreaming when I saw them, for though the moonlight was behind them, they threw no shadow on the floor. They came close to me and looked at me for some time, then whispered together. Two were dark and had high aquiline noses like the Count, and great dark piercing eyes that seemed almost red when contrasted with the pale yellow moon. The other was fair, as fair can be, with great wavy masses of golden hair, eyes like pale sapphires. Seemed somehow to know her face, to know it was the connections with some dreamy fear, but I could not recollect at the moment how or where. All three had brilliant white teeth that shone like pearls against the ruby of their voluptuous lips. There was something about them that made me uneasy, some longing, and some at the same time some deadly fear. I felt in my heart a wicked, burning desire that they would kiss me with those red lips. It was not good to note this down, lest some day it should meet Mina's eyes and cause her pain, but it is the truth. They whispered together, and then they all three laughed. Such a silvery, musical laugh, but as hard as though the sound never could have come through such soft human lips. It was like the intolerable, tingling sweetness of water glasses when played by a cunning hand. The fair girl shook her head hawkishly, then the other two urged her on. One said, "Go on, you're the first. We shall follow. Yours is the right to begin." The other added, "Is young and strong. There are kisses for us all." I lay quietly, looking out under my eyelashes in the agony of delightful anticipation. The fair girl advanced and bent over me till I could feel the movement of her breath on me. Sweet it was in one sense, honey sweet. It sent the same tingling through the nerves as her voice, but with a bitter underlying, a sweet, bitter offensiveness, as one smells in blood. I was afraid to raise my eyelids, but looked out and saw perfectly under the lashes. The fair girl went on her knees and bent over me, fairly gloating. There was deliberate voluptuousness with which was both thrilling and repulsive. As she arched her neck, she actually licked her lips like an animal, till I could see in the moonlight the moisture shining on the scarlet lips and on the red tongue as it lapped the white, sharp teeth. Lower and lower went her head as the lips went below the range of my mouth and chin and seemed about to fasten on my throat. Then she paused. I could hear the charming sound of her tongue as it licked her teeth and lips. I could feel the hot breath on my neck. Then the skin on my throat began to tingle as one's flesh does when the hand that is to tickle that ever approaches nearer, nearer. I could feel the soft, shivering touch of the lips on the super-sensitive skin of my throat, and the hard dents of two sharp teeth just touching and pausing there. I closed my eyes in luxurious ecstasy and waited with beating heart. But at that instant, another sensation swept through me as quick as lightning. I was conscious of the presence of the Count, and of his being, as if it lapped a storm of fury. My eyes opened involuntarily. I saw a strong hand grasp the slender neck of the fair woman, and with a giant's power draw it back, and the blue eyes transformed with fury, the white teeth chomping with rage, the fair cheeks blazing red with passion. But the Count. Never did I imagine such wrath and fury even from the demons of the pit. His eyes were positively blazing. The red light in them was lurid, as if the flames of hellfire blazed behind them. His face was deathly pale, and the lines of it were hard like drawn wires. The thick eyebrows that met over the nose now seemed like a heaving bar of white-hot metal. With a fierce sweep of his arm, he hurled the woman from him, and then motioned to the others, as though he were beating them back, with the same imperious gesture that he had used on the wolves. In a voice which, though low and almost a whisper, seemed to cut through the air and then ring around the room, he exclaimed, How dare you touch him, any of you? How dare you cast your eyes on him when I have forbidden? Back, I tell you all. This man belongs to me. Beware how you meddle with him, and you'll have to deal with me. The fair girl, with a laugh of ribald cockery, and turned to answer him. You yourself, you never loved. You never love. On this the other women joined, and such mirthless, hard, soulless laughter rang through the room that it almost made me faint to hear. It seemed like the pleasure of fiends. The Count turned, after looking at my face attentively, and said in a soft whisper, Yes, I too can love. You yourselves can tell it from the past. Is it not so? Well, now I promise you that when I am done with him, you shall kiss him at your will. Now go, go. I must awaken him, for there is work to be done. I would have nothing tonight, said one of them, with a low laugh. She pointed at the bag which she had thrown upon the floor, which moved as though there were some living thing within it. For answer, he nodded his head. One of the women jumped forward and opened it. If my ears did not deceive me, there was a gasp and low wail, as a half-smothered child. The women closed around, while I was aghast with horror, but I looked as they disappeared, with them the dreadful bag. There was no door near them. They could not have paused without me noticing. They simply seemed to fade into the rays of the moonlight and pass through the window. For I could see dim outside, shadowy forms for the moment, they were entirely faded away. Then the horror overcame me, and I sank down unconscious. Chapter 4. Jonathon Harker's Journal, continued. I awoke in my own bed. If it be that I had not dreamt, the Count must have carried me here. I tried to satisfy myself on the subject, but could not arrive at any unquestionable result. To be sure, there were certain small evidences, such as that my clothes were folded and laid in a manner which was not my habit. My watch was still unwound, and I am rigorously accustomed to wind it last thing before going to bed, and many such details. But these are no proof, for they may have been evidences that my mind was not usual, and for some cause or another I had certainly been much upset. I must watch for proof. Of one thing I am glad. If it was the Count that carried me here and undressed me, he must have been hurried in his task, for my pockets are intact. I'm sure this diary would have been a mystery to him which he would not have wrote. He would have taken it or destroyed it. As I look around the room, although it has been to me so full of fear, it is now a sort of sanctuary, for nothing can be more dreadful than those awful women who are waiting to suck my blood. 18th May. I may have been down to look at the room again in daylight, for I must know the truth. When I got to the doorway at the top of the stairs, I found it closed. It had been forcibly driven against the jamb, and that part of the woodwork was splintered. I could see that the bolt of the lock had not been shot, but the door was fastened from the inside. I fear it was no dream, and must act on this surmise. 19th May. I'm surely in the toils. Last night the Count asked me in the suavest tones to write 3 letters, one saying that my work here was nearly done, and that I should start for home within a few days. Another, that I was starting on the next morning from the time of the letter. The third, that I had left the castle and arrived in Bistris. I would fain have rebelled, but felt that in the present state of things it would be madness to quarrel openly with the Count whilst I am so absolutely sure of his power. To refuse would be to excite his suspicion, and that could arouse his anger. He knows that I know too much, and that I must not live, lest I be dangerous to him. My only chance is to prolong my opportunities. Something may occur which will give me a chance to escape. I saw in his eyes something of that gathering wrath which was manifest when he hurled that fair woman from him. He explained to me that the posts were few and uncertain, and that my writing now would ensure ease to the minds of my friends, and he assured me that with so much impressiveness that he would countermand the letters, which would be held over at Bursus until time and case chance would admit my prolonging my stay, as to oppose him would have been to create new suspicion. I therefore pretend to fall in with his views, and asked him what dates I should put on the letters. He calculated a moment, then said, "The first should be June 12th, the second June 19th, and the third June 29th. I now know the span of my life. God help me. 28th of May. There is a chance of escape, or at any rate being able to send word home. A band of Drazi have come to the castle, and are encamped in the courtyard. These Zorganis are gypsies. I have notes of them in my book. They're peculiar to this part of the world, though allied with ordinary gypsies all over the world. There are thousands of them in Hungary and Transylvania, who are almost outside the law. They attach themselves as a rule to a great noble or boyar, and call themselves by his name. They are fearless and without religion, save superstition, and they talk only of their own varieties of the Romani tongue. I shall write some letters home, and try to get them to have them posted. I have already spoken to them through the window to begin an acquaintanceship. They took their hats off, and made obeisance and many signs. However, I could not understand any more than I could their spoken language. I have written the letters. Mina's in shorthand, and I simply ask Mr. Hawkins to communicate with her. To her I have explained my situation, but without the horrors which I may only surmise. It could shock and frighten her to death were I to expose my heart to her. Should the letters not carry, then the Count shall not yet know of my secrets or the extent of my knowledge. I have given the letters. I threw them through the bars of the window with a gold piece, and made what signs I could to have them posted. The man who took them pressed them to his heart and bowed, and then put them in his cap. I could do no more. I stole back to the study and began to read. As the Count did not come in, I have written here. The Count is come. He has sat down beside me, and said in his smoothest voice, he has opened 2 letters. The Svergazi have given these to me, which, though I know not whence they come, I shall of course take care. See? He must have looked at it. One is from you, and the other to my friend Peter Hawkins. The other... Here he caught sight of my strange symbols as he opened the envelope, and the dark look came into his face, and his eyes blazed wickedly. The other is a vile thing, an outrage upon friendship and hospitality. It is not signed. Well, so it cannot matter to us. And he calmly held the letter and envelope in the flame of the lamp until they were consumed. Then he went on. This letter to Hawkins, that I shall, of course, send on, since it is yours. Your letters are sacred to me. Your pardon, my friend, that unknowingly I did break the seal. Will you not cover it again? He held out the letter to me, and with a courteous bow extended me a clean envelope. I could only redirect it and place him and hand it to him in silence. Then he went out of the room, and I could hear him turn softly. A minute later, I went over and tried it. The door was locked. When, an hour or two after, the Count came quietly into the room, his coming wakened me, for I had gone to sleep on the sofa. He was very courteous and very cheery in his manner, and seeing that I had been sleeping, he said, "So, my friend, are you tired? Go to bed. There is the surest rest. I may not have the pleasure to talk tonight, since there are many labors to me. But you will sleep, I pray." I passed my room and went to bed, and, strange to say, slept without dreaming. Despair has its own calms. 31st of May. This morning when I woke, I thought I would provide myself with some paper and envelopes from my bag and keep them in my pocket, so that I might write in case I should get an opportunity. But again, surprise. Again, a shock. Every scrap of paper was gone, and with it all my notes, my memoranda relating to the railways and travel, my letter of credit, in fact, all that might be useful to me once I were outside the castle. I sat and pondered a while, then some thought occurred to me, and I made search my portmanteau and then my wardrobe where I had placed my clothes. The suit in which I had traveled was gone, and also my overcoat and rug. I could find no trace of them anywhere. This looked like some new scheme of villainy. 17th of June. This morning, as I was sitting on the edge of my bed, cudgeling my brains, I heard without cracking of whips and pounding and scraping of horses' feet up the rocky path to the courtyard. With joy, I hurried to the window and saw drive into the yard 2 great leather wagons, each drawn by 8 sturdy horses, and at the head of each a pair of Slovak, with a wide hat, great nail-studded belt, dirty sheepskin, and high boots. They had also their long staves in hand. I ran to the door, intending to descend and try to join them through the main hall, as I thought that way might be opened for them. Again, a shock. My door was fastened on the outside. Then I ran to my window and cried to them. They looked up at me stupidly and pointed. Must be them, the Betmen. For the Skazzi came out. And seeing them pointing to my window and said something, at which they laughed. Henceforth, no effort of mine, no piteous cry or agonized entreaty would make them even look at me. They resolutely turned away. The little wagons contained great square boxes with handles and thick rope. They were evidently empty by the ease with which the Slovaks handled them, and by the residents as they were gruffly moved. When they were all loaded and packed in a great heap on one corner of the yard, the Slovaks were given some money by the censy, and spitting it on it for luck, lazily went each to the horse's head. Shortly afterwards, I heard the cracking of their whips die away in the distance. June 24th, before morning. At last the Count left me early, and locked himself in his own room. As soon as I dared, I ran up the winding stairs and looked out the window which opened south. I thought I could watch for the Count, for there was something going on. The Sovgani are quartered somewhere in the castle, and are doing work of some kind. I know it, for now and then I hear a faraway muffled sound as a mattock and spade, and whatever it is, it must be to the end of some ruthless villainy. I'd been at the window somewhat less than half an hour when I saw something coming out of the Count's window. I drew back and watched carefully, and saw the whole man emerge. It was a new shock to me to find that he had on a suit of clothes which I had worn while traveling there, slung over his shoulder, the terrible bag which I had seen the women take away. There could be no doubt on his quest, and my garb too. This, then, is his new scheme of evil, that he will allow others to see, as they think, so he may both leave evidence that I have been in the towns and villages posting my letters, and that any wickedness which he may do shall be seen by the local people and attributed to me. It makes me rage to think that this can go on, and whilst I am shut up here, a veritable prisoner, and without that protection of the law which is even a criminal's right and consolation. I thought I would watch for the Count's return, and for a long time sat doggedly at the window. Then I began to notice that there were some quaint specks of light floating in the rays of the moonlight. They were like the tiniest grains of dust that whirled around and gathered in clusters in a nebulous sort of way. I watched them with a sense of soothing, and a sort of calm stole over me. I leaned back in the embrasure in a more comfortable position, so that I could enjoy more of the fully aerial gamboling. Something made me start up, the low, piteous howling of dogs somewhere far below in the valley, which was hidden from my sight. Louder seemed to ring in my ears, and the floating motes of dust take new shapes to the sound as they danced in the moonlight. I felt myself struggling to awake to some call of my instincts. Nay, my very soul was struggling, and my half-remembered sensibilities were striving to answer the call. I was becoming hypnotized. Quicker and quicker danced the dust, and the moonbeams seemed to quiver as they went by me in the mass of the gloom beyond. More and more, till they gathered still, they seemed to take a dim phantom shapes, and then I started, broad awake and in full possession of my senses, ran screaming from the place. The phantom shapes, which were becoming gradually materialized in the moonlight and moonbeams, were those of the three ghostly women to whom I was doomed. I fled, and felt somewhat safer in my room, where there was no moonlight, where the lamp was burning brightly. When a couple of hours had passed, I heard something stirring in the Count's room, something like a sharp wail quickly suppressed. And then there was a silence, deep, awful silence, which chilled me. With a beating heart, I tried the door, but I was locked in my prison and could do nothing. I sat down and simply cried. As I sat, I heard the sound in the courtyard without, an agonized cry of a woman. I rushed to the window and, throwing it up, peered out between the bars. There, indeed, was a woman with disheveled hair, holding her hands over her heart as one distressed with running. She was leaning against the corner of the gateway when she saw my face at the window and threw herself forward, and shouted in a voice laden with menace, "Monster, give me my child!" She threw herself on her knees, and raised up her hands, and cried the same words in tones which wrung my heart. Then she tore her hair, and beat her breasts, and abandoned herself to the violence of extravagant emotion. Finally, she threw herself forward, and, though I could not see her, I could hear the beating of her naked hands against the door. Somewhere high overhead, probably on the tower, I heard the voice of the Count calling out in a harsh, metallic whisper. His call seemed to be answered from far and wide by the howling wolves. For many minutes had passed, a pack of them poured, like a pent-up dam, liberated through the wide entrance of the courtyard. There was no cry from the woman, and the howling of the wolves was but short. Before long they streamed away singly, licking their lips. I could not pity her, for I knew now what had become of her child, and she was better dead. What shall I do? What can I do? How can I escape from this dreadful thrall of night and gloom and fear? 25th of June, morning. No man knows till he has suffered from the night how sweet and how dear to his heart and eye the morning can be. When the sun grew so high this morning that it struck the top of the great gateway opposite my window, the high spot which it touched seemed to me as if a dove from the ark had appeared. My fear fell from me as if it had been a vaporous garment which dissolved in the warmth. I must take action of some sort while the courage of day is upon me. Last night, when my post-dated letters went to the post, the first of the fatal series, which is to blot out every traces of my existence on Earth. Let me not think of it. Action! It has always been at night time that I have been molested or threatened, or in some way in danger or in fear. I have not yet seen the Count in the daylight. Can it be that he sleeps when others wake? That he may be awake whilst they sleep? If I could only get into his room! But there's no possible way. The door is always locked. No way for me. Yes, there was a way if one dares to take it. Where his body has gone, why not make another body go? I have seen him crawl from his window. Why should I not imitate it and go in by his window? The chances are desperate, but my need is more desperate still. I shall risk it. At the worst, it can only be death, and a man's death is not a calf's. The dread hereafter may still be upon me. God help me in this task. Goodbye, Mina. If I fail, goodbye. My faithful friend and second father, goodbye, all, and their last, Mina. Same day, later. I have made the effort and, God helping me, have come safely back to this room. I must put down every detail in order. I went whilst my courage was fresh straight to the window on the south side, and once got outside on the narrow ledge of stone which runs around the building on this side. The stones were big and roughly cut, and the mortar had by process of time been washed away between them. I took off my boots and ventured on the desperate way. I looked down once, as to make sure that a sudden glimpse of the awful depth would not overcome me. But after that, kept my eyes away from it. I knew pretty well the direction and the distance to the Count's window, and made for it as well as I could, having regard for the opportunities available. I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I was too excited. And the time seemed ridiculously short till I found myself standing on the windowsill and trying to raise up the sash. I was filled with agitation, however, when I bent down and slid feet foremost to the window. Then I looked around for the Count, but with surprise and gladness I made a discovery. The room was empty. It was barely furnished with odd things, which seemed to have never been used. The furniture was something the same style that was in the south rooms, but was covered with dust. I looked for the key, but it was not in the lock. I could not find it anywhere. The only thing I found was a great heap of gold in one corner. Gold of all kinds, Roman and British and Austrian and Hungarian and Greek and Turkish money, covered with a film of dust as though it had been laying long in the ground. None of it, I noticed, was less than 300 years old. There was also chains and ornaments, some jeweled, but all of them old and stained. At the corner of the room was a heavy door. I tried it, for since I could not find the key to the room or the key to the outer door, which was the main object of my search, I must make further examination. All my efforts would be in vain. It was opened. It led through a stone passage to a circular stairway which went steeply down. I descended, minding carefully where I went, for the stairs were dark, being only lit by loopholes in the masonry. At the bottom of the stair was a dark, tunnel-like passage, through which came some deathly, sickly odor of old earth newly turned. As I went through the passage, the smell grew closer and heavier. As I pulled open the heavy door which stood ajar, I found myself in an old, ruined chapel, which had evidently been used as a graveyard. The roof was broken, and in two places were steps leading to vaults, but the ground had recently been dug over, and the earth placed in great wooden boxes, manifestly those which had been brought by the Slovaks. There was nobody about, and I made search for any further outlets, but there was none. Then I went over every inch of the ground, as not to lose a chance. I went down even into the vaults, where the dim light struggled, although to do so was a dread to my very soul. Into two of these I went, but saw nothing except fragments of old coffins and piles of dust. In the third, however, I made a discovery. There, in one of the great boxes, of which there were 50 in all, on a pile of newly dug earth, lay the Count. He was either dead or asleep, I could not say which, for the eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life, though through their pallor the lips were as red as ever. But there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart. I went over to him and tried to find any sign of life, but in vain. He could not have lain there long, for the earthy smell would have passed away in a few hours. By the side of the box was its cover, pierced with holes here and there. I thought he might have had the keys on him, but when I went to search I saw the dead eyes, and in them, dead though they were, such a look of hate, though unconscious of me, of my presence, that I fled the place, leaving the Count's room by the window. Going up again the castle wall and regaining my chamber, threw myself, panting, upon my bed, and tried to think. 29th of June. Today is the date of my last letter, and the Count has taken steps to prove that it was genuine, for again I saw him leave the castle by the same window, and in my clothes. As he went down the wall, lizard fashion, I wished I had a gun or some lethal weapon that I might destroy him. But I fear that no weapon, wrought alone by man's hand, would have any effect on him. I dared not wait to see him return, for I feared to see those weird sisters. Came back to the library, and read there until I fell asleep. I was awakened by the Count, who looked at me as grimly as a man can, as he said, "Tomorrow, my friend, we must part. You return to your beautiful England, I to work which may have some end that we may never meet. Your letter home has been dispatched. Tomorrow I shall not be here, but all shall be ready for your journey. In the morning come to Zensky, who have some labors of their own here, and alas, come the Slovaks. When they have gone, my carriage shall come for you, and shall bear you to the Borgo Pass to meet the diligence from Bohemia to Distris. But I am in hopes I shall see more of you at Castle Dracula." I suspected him, and determined to test his sincerity. It seems I have profanation of the word to write in, the connotation with such a monster. So I asked him point blank, "May I not go tonight?" "Because, dear sir, my coachman and horses are away on the mission." "But I would walk with pleasure. I want to get away at once." He smiled, but a soft, smooth, and diabolical smile that I knew there was some trick behind its smoothness. He said, "And your baggage?" "I do not care about it. I can send for it some other time." The Count stood up and said, with a sweet courtesy which made me rub my eyes, it seemed so real, "Your English have a saying which is close to my heart, for it is spirits which gives rule to boyars. Welcome the coming, speed parting guest. Come with me, my dear friend. Not an hour shall you wait in my house against your will, though sad I am at your going, and that you so suddenly desire it. Come." With a stately gravity, he, with the lamp, preceded me down the stairs in the long hall. Suddenly he stopped. "Hark!" Close at hand came the howling of many wolves. It was almost as if the sound sprang up from the raising of his hand, just as the music of a great orchestra seems to leap under the baton of a conductor. After a pause for a moment, he proceeded, in his stately way to the door, drew back the ponderous bolts, unhooked the heavy chains, and began to draw it open. To my immense astonishment, I saw that it was unlocked. Suspicious, I looked all around, but could see no key of any kind. As the door began to open, the howling of the wolves grew louder and angrier. Their red jaws, their clamping teeth, their blunt-clawed feet as they leapt, came through the opening door. I knew that I had to struggle at the moment against the Count was useless. With such allies as these at his command, I could do nothing. But still, the door continued to open slowly, and only the Count's body stood in the gap. Suddenly it struck me why this might be the moment of the means of my doom. I was to be given to the wolves, and at my own instigation. There was a diabolical wickedness in the idea, great enough for the Count, and the last chance I cried out, "Shut the door! I shall wait until morning," and covered my face with my hands to hide the tears of bitter disappointment. With one sweep of his powerful arm, the Count threw the door shut, and the great bolts clanged, echoed through the hall, and they shot back into their places. In silence, we returned to the library, and after a minute or two I went to my own room. The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me with a red light of triumph in his eyes, with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. When I was in my room and about to lie down, I thought I heard the whispering at my door. I went to it softly and listened. Unless my ears deceived me, I heard the voice of the Count. Back to your own place. Your time has not yet come. Wait, have patience. Tomorrow night is yours." There was a low, sweet ripple of laughter, and in a rage I threw open the door and saw without the three terrible women licking their lips. As I appeared, they all joined in a horrible laugh and ran away. I came back to my room and threw myself on my knees. Was this how it was to end? Tomorrow, Lord help me, and those whom I endear. 30th of June, morning. These may be the last words I ever write in this diary. I slept till just before dawn, and when I woke, threw myself on my knees, for I determined that if death came, he should find me ready. At last I felt a subtle change in the air, and knew that the morning had come. Then came the welcome cockcrow, and I felt that I was safe. With a glad heart I opened my door and ran down to the hall. I had seen that the door was unlocked, and now escape was before me. With hands that trembled with eagerness, I unhooked the chains and drew back the massive bolts. But the door would not move. Despair seized me. I pulled and pulled at the door, and shook till, as massive as it was, it rattled in its casements. I could see the bolt shot. It could have been locked after I left the Count. Then a wild desire took me to obtain that key at any risk, and I determined then and there to scale the wall again and gain the Count's room. He might kill me, but death now seemed the happier choice of evils. Without a pause, I rushed to the east window and scrambled down the wall, and as before into the Count's room. It was empty, but with that I was expected. I could not see the key anywhere, but the heap of gold remained. I went through the door in the corner and down the winding stair, along the dark passage to the old chapel. I knew now well enough where to find the monster I sought. The great box was in the same place, close against the wall, but the lid was laid on it, not fastened down, but with the nails ready in their places to be hammered home. I knew I must search the body for the keys, so I raised the lid and laid it back against the wall. Then I saw something which filled my very soul with horror. There lay the Count, but looking as if his youth was half renewed, for the white hair and mustache were changed to dark iron gray. His cheeks were fuller, and the white hair seemed ruby red underneath. Mouth was redder than ever, for on the lips were gouts of fresh blood, which trickled from the corners of the mouth and ran down over the chin and neck. Even the deep, burning eyes seemed set amongst swollen flesh, for the lids and pouches underneath were bloated. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood, and lay like a filthy leech, exhausted in its repletion. I shuddered as I bent over to touch him, and every sense in me revolted at the contact. But I had to search, or I was lost. The coming night might see my own body, a banquet in a similar horror way of this horrid three. I felt all over the body, but no signs could I find the key. Then I stopped and looked at the Count. There was a mocking smile on the bloated face which seemed to drive me mad, that this was the being that I was helping to transfer to London, where perhaps for centuries to come he might, amongst its teeming millions, satiate his lust for blood, and create a new and ever-widening circle of semi-demons to batten on the helpless. The very thought drove me mad. A terrible desire came upon me to rid the world of such a monster. There was no lethal weapon at hand, but I seized a shovel which the workmen had been using to fill the cases, lifting it high struck, with the edge outward, at the hateful face. But as I did so, the head turned, and the eyes fell upon me, with all their blaze of basilisk horror. The sight seemed to paralyze me, and the shovel turned in my hand and glanced around from the face, merely taking a deep gash above the forehead. The shovel fell from my hands across the box. As I pulled away, flames of the blade caught the edge of the lid, which fell over again, and hid the horrid thing from my sight. The last glimpse I had was of the bloated face, blood-stained, and fixed with a grin of malice which would have held its own in the nethermost hell. I thought and thought what should be my next move, but my brain seemed on fire, and I waited with the despairing feeling growing over me. As I waited, I heard in the distance a gypsy song sung by merry voices coming near, and through their song, rolling heavy wheels and cracking of whips. The Svani and the Slovaks, of whom the Count had spoken, were coming. With the last look round at the box which contained the vile body, I ran from the place and gained the Count's room, determined to rush out the moment the door would be opened. With strained ears I listened and heard downstairs the grinding of the key in the great lock, falling back of the heavy door. There must have been some other means of entry, or someone had a key of one of the locked doors. Then there came the sound of many feet tramping and dying away in some passage which sent up a clanging echo. I turned to run down again towards the vault, where I might come up the new passage, but at that moment there seemed to come a violent puff of wind, and the door to the winding stair blew to shock that set the dust of the lintels flying. When I ran to push it open, I found that it was hopelessly fast. I was again a prisoner, and the net of doom was closing around me more slowly. As I write, as in this here passage, below the sound of many tramping feet and weight of crashing weights being set down heavily. Doubtless the boxes end at their freight of the earth. There was the sound of hammering, as the box being nailed down. Now I can hear the heavy feet tramping again along the hall, with many other idle feet coming behind them. The door is shut, and the chains rattle. There's a grinding of the key in the lock. I can hear the key withdrawn, and another door opened and shuts. I hear the creak in the lock and the bolt. Hark, in the courtyard, down the rocky way of the roll of heavy wheels, the crack of whips, and the chorus of Svani as they pass into the distance. I'm alone in the castle with those awful women. Mina is a woman. There is naught in common. They are devils of the pit. I shall not remain alone with them. I shall try to scale the castle wall farther than I have yet attempted. I shall take some gold with me, lest I want it later. I may find a way from this dreadful place. And then away from home. Away to the quickest and nearest train. Away from this cursed spot. from this cursed land where the devil and his children still walk with earthly feet. At least God's mercy is better than that of these monsters, and the precipice is steep and high. At its foot a man may sleep, as a man. Goodbye all, Nina.